Welcome back, and we still welcome comments from you on hashtag the Modise Network. Various reports indicate that 80% of children in grade 4 or aged between 9 and 11 cannot read nor write with comprehension. Of the 50 countries surveyed by the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, PEARLS, South Africa came last. There are various issues at play, and the situation gets complicated by the fact that African children in particular get pushed to learn in English before they can master even their home languages. The implications speak for themselves. To discuss this, I'm joined by the National Education Collaboration Trust CEO, Mr. Godwin Khosa, who's with me here in the studio. Godwin, pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Well, pleasure to be on your show too, Ebratim.
And obviously a concerning statistic, that one coming from this international study. I've seen even The Economist repeats the article in their publication that we do have a situation here in the country. Even the president has said something about this. I just want to hear your own personal opinion and reaction to this.
So it's quite a concerning, state of affairs. Something that we reconfirmed at the end of 2017. We somewhat knew that there's a proportion of our kids who can't read for meaning. But I think when the statistic was confirmed, some 2 years ago, it really got South Africans thinking, right from researchers to educationists, about what we do with the situation and what could be the cause of this situation. Perhaps I need to just add and say there are different levels at which people will be expected to read. This is beyond learners in schools. The first is that they must be able to decode text. So if you put a couple of letters that make a word and the words make a sentence, they must be able to sound out those words, right? That's the first level. And that's got to be taught in each and every classroom. The second level is when you read these words and statements, you must be able to extract meaning, right? Also, pretty much of what has to be taught in the classroom. The third level, which is a higher order level, is that you got to appreciate the value of reading. You got to enjoy reading. You have to have a culture of reading, which has huge benefits, from economic to learner achievement and to just self-fulfillment. So generally, South Africans are not at that higher order level, and in fact, we're talking here of an ecosystem. How parents, the extent to which parents read, the culture of parents, a culture of reading amongst adults and so on, reinforces what happens in the classroom. And in fact, our position is that you actually have to deal with this comprehensively, from dealing with the technical aspects of helping kids to read to actually inculcating the culture and creating the environments for kids to read alongside the adults. It's something that we have to work together, to fix. I don't like saying, there are no shortcuts and blah, blah, but this is a real endemic problem that requires the whole society to stand up and work together to address.
Well, I mean, your organization is working on a national reading plan. So if you can just give me the context of how you developed the national reading plan and this collaboration trust is all about.
Yeah. So the collaboration trust, the National Education Collaboration Trust, was founded as a joint, or rather jointly founded by business, government, civil society and labor to help government implement Chapter 9 of the National Development Plan, which is about education and training. Established in 2013, July, and has done various interventions in the system to a point where it's working with about 16,600 schools out of the 25,000 schools that we have. And there's a lot more detail about that. But in particular, when the 2017 report on reading came out, the board of the National Education Collaboration Trust felt that there's got to be a national response, to this endemic problem. And given that, reading is so primary that it has impact on other, educational outcomes. If kids can't read, they won't do well in any other subjects. So focus was, moved back to, to reading. So when we did a survey and a scan of what's happening in the country, I mean, we found that government was doing, a lot to improve reading, and so are the non-governmental, people and organizations doing all sorts of things across the landscape of the country to improve reading. But these initiatives don't share approaches. These initiatives aren't well coordinated. They leave gaps, or non-governmental people stumble on each other. There's inefficiencies and so on. So one of the things that we thought we could help as the National Education Collaboration Trust is to improve the coordination of the work that is being done by the country to improve reading. So the proposal to establish the National Reading Coalition came from that. And a coalition is different from a program. You want to connect the people who are already doing things and try and enjoy economies of scale and impact. So as part of the coalition, we suggested that the country should start its focus on 25% of the primary schools, which are located obviously in 25% of the education circuits across the country. So there's like 1,000 education circuits in the country. By so doing, we want to make sure that partners work with government in these hotspots to make sure that each and every school definitely has a library with sufficient number of books. The teachers know how to teach reading. The households support reading by getting their kids to read when they get home. Even the community reinforce the message of reading.
But here's the point. I want to interrupt you there and find out if we're not missing the point in whatever, whether it be a collaboration between yourselves, business and government and civil society, that the foundation phase of learning is where South Africa misses the point completely, the early childhood learning, that the problem starts there, that is, it's not properly established or firmed up in the country. I wonder to what extent you have made interventions there.
So the National Reading Coalition's big focus is in those years, those foundational years. And in fact, efforts to improve reading should start even before kids are born. So even pregnant mothers must actually read to their kids before they are born. And so should they read to their kids as they grow up, so that reading becomes part and parcel of their upbringing. So we're focusing pretty much, in those foundational, phases of the education system. But I need to emphasize that this should not be seen as a challenge that can be dealt with from the school. So we have to break out into the community and ensure that we reactivate, energy in the community to reinforce what is happening in the classroom.
Again, what we have observed, and I'm sure there are many studies that can confirm this, is that in many communities, parents are not involved in education in any way. And you can see by the results, because unfortunately we use the benchmark of matric to measure whether the education system is working or not. But there are communities where actually the failure rate is very, very high, and it's a reflection of what is going on in that community.
So you're very right, and I mean, it so happens that any ills that are in the community would actually find an expression in the school. If kids are not well fed in the community, it will find expression in the school. If there's discipline problem in the community, that will find its way into the classroom. And so is just merely cognitive development. If parents are not talking to their kids, engaging them in right ways that help them to develop, you'll find that in the schools. But we are where we are. The best is to find the key leverage points to reverse those ills. So social development must continue to do its social development work and health and so on. When kids are in the school, we have to do what we have to do as teachers to help bridge those gaps. But back to reading, we can't solve reading by simply getting kids to be taught reading in the classroom, as I indicated. So what the National Reading Coalition has, is proposing is that we focus on 6 areas. One is that we strengthen the way we prepare teachers to teach reading right from university. Because not all universities or university programs prepare teachers to teach reading. And in fact, some of them will prepare teachers in universities to teach reading in African languages, but teach them in English, for instance. So we've got to strengthen that.
Yeah.
Secondly, we're proposing that we help the 433,000 teachers who are in our classrooms and schools today to teach reading better, right? Thirdly, we're proposing that we increase access to quality, age and language relevant materials that are available to kids, because the gaps are huge. And the last three things are that let's bring in the community, let's make sure that policy is appropriate, and lastly, let's set targets, let's monitor, and let's evaluate to make sure that
I like the last point better.
forward. Yeah.
I like the last point better.
I thought as much.
Because, we can talk all we like, and
Yeah.
different organizations and different departments and even, individuals doing
Yeah.
the best they can to assist the education system. But if the outcomes are not met,
Yeah.
then we'll be in the same place. So what indicators then are you going to be looking at? And in order for those indicators to be met, what are the specific things that are going to be done where?
Right. So there are outcome indicators, and the outcome indicators are, we must have kids read, and the president has said kids must read for meaning at the age of 10.
Yes.
So that's a hard indicator, right? So we're now starting to collect data on how many of those kids are starting to move towards that target, and we have to chase it. But as I said, then we have to set targets on each of those 6 areas or 5 areas that I've mentioned. So how many of our teachers are coming out well prepared from the universities? How many of these universities have now started to implement in a very decisive manner teacher training programs that prepare teachers to teach reading? How many books are accessible to learners at what age? Because you can't learn to read if you don't have,
access to books. Now, and these are simple or simpler practical things, right?
Yeah.
But one wonders, are there books in schools as we speak?
So there are books, there are insufficient.
libraries.
There are insufficient number of books in schools. And there are a number of challenges. There are schools that would have very few books for kids to read. So when we look at books that kids must have access to, the 2 categories of books. One are graded readers, which help the kids to improve on the technical aspects of reading. The other is books that are available to read for leisure, which in fact promotes the love for books and that sort of thing. And those should be available both at schools, in public libraries, and at home, and so on and so forth. So it's important that when a local government, library is built, there's a children's section, and it's staffed. It's important that arts and culture actually, make sure that there's children's sections with books of that nature. But also, even more important, each and every parent should see it fit to buy a couple of books and put them in a shelf, and we can in fact swap your toys for Christmas for books, to inculcate that culture of reading, and in fact to help kids access better quality reading material.
Well, I think at some point in the future we've got to have you come back here and tell us whether the outcomes demonstrate that your efforts are bearing fruit. But ultimately, the responsibility of encouraging reading in our nation remains with individuals who understand what this is all about, and parents, of course, in their homes. Buy a few books for Christmas.
Absolutely.
Godwin Khosa says, I wonder if you will do that. But you must also, as a parent, show that you read too. I suppose that works too, doesn't it?
So, in fact, I wasn't going to leave the show before I ask you, Bratim, what
Yes.
you're reading at the moment.
Okay, I can tell you.
Sure, I saw, and so can I.
Well, my habit is to read several books at the same time, so
Me
I'm reading
too, yeah.
about 3 books all at the same time. But let me leave
that for
because,
later.
Be sure to engage with the show using the hashtag the Modise Network on social media, and we will be focusing on Solidarity, the union, and their efforts as they build a new university for Afrikaner speakers in the nation.